I have talked about Stephen King quite a bit on this channel, and I'm happy to say I seem to have convinced a lot of people to start reading Stephen King, or at least give him another chance, due to what I've seen in the comments sections. A lot of people commenting that they've loved the Stephen King they've picked up off my recommendation, or telling me that they went back into it, or just saying, hey, I've been a lifelong Stephen King fan and they're happy to see me talking about him, because he's a very misunderstood author in some ways outside of his diehard fans. And I would like to talk about something that I think even some of his diehard fans often misrepresent or are just completely wrong about. And that is the discussion around old Stephen King versus new Stephen King. Because there is a pretty drastic change in his writing style, the topics he covers, where his even focus is as an author now, as opposed to 20, 30 years ago. Now, before I get into this though, I do want to say that you are not wrong for having a preference between old and new Stephen King, or even no preference at all, just loving it all equally. That's absolutely okay. But there's absolutely a discussion to be had here about what has changed and why. The only people I think who are absolutely wrong are the people who seem to often think it's cool or trendy or what have you to say new Stephen King is bad. I think that's absolutely ridiculous, because new Stephen King is putting out some incredible work, and I've never seen anyone really substantiate saying that with anything substantial. All they've really said is, oh, old Stephen King was better, I don't like his new stuff. And if you go, well, what of his new stuff have you read? They're just, I skimmed the Institute, about it. Okay, if you haven't read anything past it, don't talk on the matter. And I also need to point out that I'm not the most well-read Stephen King fan. I think I'm more well-read in new King than a lot of people, and I've read a good amount of older King, and I've seen some pretty drastic changes, and I want to talk about those here. Now, when I say Stephen King, people probably immediately think of his older writing style first by default. It's what he's most known for. The It's, The Shinings, The Stands, these books are huge, and they meander a bit. The focus isn't completely concise. It's about the demons of these people's past. It's about figuring out who these characters are based off what they've been through, and then how these current experiences are making the demons of who they were, or the hauntings of their past, really come to the forefront. He's this whole story of a character now coming to a zenith due to the extreme supernatural events occurring here. I think that's why so many people accuse old King, not completely unjustly, of being ridiculously meandering in his text. I mean, you can't get through it and not notice that we're spending a lot of time on characters who aren't wholly central to the main story and their development. And that's because every time someone really touches the plot at all in older Stephen King's works, he's going to develop them. He's going to give them motivation. He's going to spend a lot of time on them. And even maybe some of the smaller aspects of the story that really don't feel consequential at all, he'll touch on repeatedly. And there's the running joke of, oh, it's because drugs, he wasn't focused. I don't necessarily want to chalk it up to that. I think he has legitimately just matured and changed where his focus is as an author. You can go as far as to even say maybe Stephen King had a lot more demons he hadn't resolved in his life, so he was more interested as an author to explore his characters' demons. I don't know the guy personally. I don't really want to make that accusation. Maybe he just liked focusing on the flaws of his characters more before, and now he's not quite so there. But as we transition into modern King, character work is still great. It's just not nearly as well realized as it was back then. His entire writing style is a lot more tight and actually focused on the narrative at hand, which I find to be a jarring change. It's a completely different approach to writing. On the same level of reading Wheel of Time and switching over to Robert Jordan's recent release, Warrior of the Altai. The change in writing style there is huge, and I think the same exists for old and new King as well. New King doesn't explore his characters on that level, period. He just doesn't. You get who they are now, but you never really fully understand who they were. You never fully build them to find out every flaw from their past, what's haunting them currently. I can't even think of an example of that from new Stephen King. The best example I can think of is my favorite new Stephen King book, 11/22/63. One I consider a masterpiece. I think the plot here is spectacular. The suspense is some of the best King has ever done. It has great character work in the sense of who this person is now in the text. You get personality. You really feel like you know him as like a new friend, but you cannot nearly understand him as well as a character in terms of his history as you would coming in with like a Jack Torrance. Or hell, let's look at the obvious example. Every character from It who's in the main group, we get literally in the page, here's their past, the events that scarred them so much, and their present. I feel like a different author would have either split it into 2 different books, or it would have just not covered it all as kids, and you would have gotten hints or things along those lines. But no, it really brings in, here's all their childhood trauma, here's how it's affecting them as adults. That's like textbook what I'm talking about. He likes to really flesh out why the person was so flawed up to this point. New King ain't doing that so much. New King focuses a lot more. New King's a weird thing to say, but he focuses a lot more on how this character is developed in the here and current time. And there's also just less energy spent on characters as much. I feel personally as a King reader, he's focusing way more on tightening up his narrative, building almost world-like elements, atmosphere a little more, even though those things were never lacking before. But in 11/22/63 especially, King made that time period come to life in incredible ways, more so than he did in It For Me, another book that takes place in 2 separate time chunks. I've heard fans theorize a lot why about this change happened quite a bit. I've heard some people say it happened when King got in his infamous car crash. I don't think it's quite so instant there. I've heard other people say the change happened before, during, and after the Dark Tower series. There's a reasonable debate to be had for that. I'm not trying to say why Stephen King has changed and evolved as an author. There's a decent chance it's just, hey, he's older and more experienced now and has changed where he likes his focus to be. That's okay.
It's almost like not everything has to be dramatic, and sometimes people just change, and that's okay. You can change as you grow up. I approve.
He's also probably gotten a lot of critical feedback and noticed that having a more here and now focused stories won't alienate as many readers. Because I think what a lot of people struggle with King, who have a harder time getting into his older works, is how much it does seem to drift into the past, how heavily these things that are only hinted at seem to really weigh on the story. There's a very big discussion that could be had there. But when you're comparing these 2 different writing focuses, let's go for Salem's Lot and The Outsider, it's really jarring how different I feel like those stories read in terms of where their focus is. Now, even if someone put a gun to my head and said, Daniel, choose which you like better, old or new King, I'd have a really hard time choosing, because I love King's just clear mastery of everything he's attempting. Even his most recent release at the time of putting out this video, The Institute, feels like it was handled by someone who is just a veteran of what they do. It wasn't the most epic Stephen King story. There are definite flaws there, but in terms of pacing, the action sequences, character work, it's so freaking well done. And then you can look at his top of the line, still tons of energy, larger works of New King like 11/22/63, which I will never stop praising and telling people you should freaking read. And there is a clear elevation of craft that has happened now compared to his older work. That being said, the chaotic factor of old King, the unpredictability of where things might go next, the just zany, outside the box, crazy character work where he's willing to go on these tangents that seem at the time completely unrelated to what's currently happening, and in some cases end up being a bit unrelated, but that's fine. There is certainly a beauty in that chaos that has a certain X factor to it that no one else is able to reproduce, arguably even New King. And there's a lot of gray here. This was not a change, in my opinion, that happened to Stephen King overnight. Throughout the 80s to 90s to early 2000s, it is a slow shift rather than a flicking of a switch. But I think, and I still need to read more Stephen King before I give a clear definitive answer to this, but I personally feel I like new Stephen King a bit more overall in terms of the focus of his craft, the character work he's able to do so quickly, the atmosphere building, world building. The guy just out like no one else. He's able to just put to page now so quickly and make you love or hate a character within a couple paragraphs and understand them. I have personally never seen an author who's able to effectively communicate who a character is so subtly than King is able to now. The prime example of this level of character work for me would be in his recent release, The Institute. There was not one character who within the first page of meeting them, I feel like I did not actually get the level of first impression I would get from meeting them in person than I did from just reading Stephen King's quick description, brief starting interactions, and just little details he sprinkles in to let you know That's who that is. The subtle, ooh, I don't quite trust them because of this vibe level crafting, or maybe the immediate trust he can give you from just what appears to be the blatant honesty of a character. Yes, King, back all the way into his first works, way back in the day, was still able to do beautiful character work, but I just don't feel like it was quite as tight and focused as he's doing now. Now, one is not objectively better than the other. Other people will have their preferences. I 100% and can agree with someone's preference for Carrie over the Institute, his oldest to his newest. I understand without a doubt. But today, I think I prefer his newest releases because of that tighter focus. And if you ask me tomorrow, my answer could be completely different, honestly. It's something I'm not settled on. But I would love to see this discussion continued in the comments down below. Let me know what you think. Are you a diehard classic Stephen King guy? You can't stand the new stuff? Or are you, no, you like the new stuff, you think the older stuff was a bit too chaotic, not nearly as focused as you prefer? Let me know, because there is obvious debate to be had here, and I know there's a lot of die-hard Stephen King nerds out there like myself. Anyway, guys, like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here. And have a good one, y'all. Peace.